So, good afternoon once again. Welcome to my 2 o'clock slot on Fridays. Again, we are tackling Romans together. And we have gotten up to. I mentioned, of course, however, that the Romans is truly a very, very deep book. You cannot read it superficially. If you do, you'll be in trouble. And we're only up to, it's been three, four, I think this is the fourth installment, and we're barely out of chapter 2. We're up to verse 17, where Paul departs from his excoriation of the depraved in Roman society, and particularly in Roman society and its government and management and so forth, where boy, it was bad. Okay. But we're going now, and he turns his attention to, remember, Paul himself as a Jew. The Bible is Jewish. I mentioned before that of all the 66 books there are in the Bible, only two of them were written by someone who wasn't Jewish. That would be Luke, who wrote the Gospel according to Luke, and the book of Acts. He was a good chronicler and a very good, and Luke, the beloved physician, who knows what kind of actual practice of modern medicine, by contrast, he actually was. In those days, usually bleeding, a few herbs, being able to set a bone. Surgery really was non existent, except to, of course, amputate, which was practiced usually ended in death anyway. But I want to stay within the parameters of the Bible and to interpret the Bible with the Bible. And for that, when we now turn to the Jews, last week we looked at Abraham, the father of the Jews, literally. And now I want to look at the Jews themselves, and to do that we have to look at Moses and the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Pentateuch, which is Greek, once again, penta being 5, and tuka meaning book, 5 books, Pentateuch, and that is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these are all Moses' law, okay, or actually most of it is Moses' law. The Exodus covers the exit. In matter of fact, that's our modern day word, exit. What it actually means is this way to safety. We all have seen exit signs over doors, haven't we, right? In case of a fire, it's supposed to go out and to safety that way. And Exodus in Greek means pretty much the same thing. How the ancient Jewish population, which had really grown to superb numbers in the interim between Joseph going down to Egypt with 70 persons in all, prospering under an unknown Pharaoh, and 430 years later, somewhere between 500,000 to 200 million or so. The estimates vary scholarship to scholarship. It doesn't really matter. Exited Egypt because of God's intervention, and became, of course, the Jewish people with their own country, what God had promised to Abraham. We covered that in the last segment. So now we're going to look at the Jews and their law, and how unless you keep the entire law scrupulously and honestly, it will avail you nothing, particularly for the kind of rescue that you get by placing your faith and confidence in Jesus. And we read, of course, beginning in verse 17, "Indeed, you who are called a Jew, and rest or have confidence in the law, and make your boast in God, and know his will, and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law, and are confident that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes." Get this, right? This is Paul at his best. "Having the form of knowledge and truth in the law, you therefore who teach one another, Do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? There are all kinds of thefts, you know. We can all understand a thug knocking over an old woman and stealing the contents of her purse. But many of us struggle with a white-collar criminal who lies to his legal and lies to his financial, presses a button on a computer, and steals well over $100 million in corporate profits. I can show you the anatomy of the crime step by step in a courtroom with a big billboard and a pointer, and yet many people still look at it and go, "How? What? No, I don't get it." Theft comes in many varieties, my friends. Paul was extremely aware of this. That's why he says, you who steal, you who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law? And here's pretty much as timeless as it gets right here. This is from Ezekiel. The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. And Ezekiel, of course, was around 600 years before Jesus. So we're looking at back at 2,500 years ago, easily enough. That's still the same today. Many Christians are to blame for why people hold the Christian faith in such contempt. Look at what he's going through here. It's the hypocrisy of the religious. God save us from such things. Now, all that the law ever did, and it was intended to do, was to teach anyone who read it. And by the way, the law in the ancient world, and I speak as somewhat of an authority, but like I said at the very beginning, sheep, shepherd, or wolf? Am I a good guy or a bad guy teaching you this? And that the world, in the ancient world, before the Exodus and Moses, all the world lived in slavery. And slavery remains, to this day, the most prevalent form of government of any kind for the vast history of this world since as long as we have been keeping knowledge of the past. Some big guy made you do what he's told you to do with threat of death or some kind of pain inflicted with a whipping or whatever, and compelled people out of fear to do what he told them. Hence the word kratos, the word of law, which proceeds from the author of it. And God's law was in direct contrast and confuted Pharaoh. If you recall just briefly, Pharaoh and Egypt, you had an perfect equilateral triangle, which was symbolic of the structure of society in Egypt. And in Egypt, you had the Pharaoh at the top. He was considered to be a god speaking the word of law with his lips. And then you had upper management, middle management, lower management, labor, and at the very bottom you had the Hebrews. They were the grease that made the giant rocks slide across the desert floor in order to build those pyramids and so forth. And that same structure follows in corporate America much the same way. You have the CEO at the top, then you have his upper management, your chief financial officer, your chief legal advisor, and so on and so forth, which I mentioned. Then you have middle management who figure out how to implement the orders that come from the chief executive officer. And then you have lower management who figure out how they're going to get labor to do what middle management has just said they have to do. And then finally you have labor who, actually build the things or make the things or carry out the orders that come from the top. And this was the nature of Egypt. And of course it's fairly simple when you look at it. Then came the law of Moses, and it is a law that shows you how to have an entire society that obeys God instead of a man, and which is knit together thereby because the law is darn near perfect, a template for creating an almost ideal society. This is the problem with the law. We as humans tend not to want to obey it because we're selfish. But my last remark before we get into a further and deeper study of this just little segment of Romans is that the law in the ancient world was kind of like going for a stroll in a desert, nothing but sand and cactus and succulent, hardy, shrewd plant life. Very sparse. The home of Gila monsters and rattlesnakes. And finding on your little walk a perfectly cut crystal, pure white diamond about the size of a basketball. And of course, it makes you wonder, what is this doing here, and how in the world did this get here? We'll examine Moses' law a little closer next time around. Indeed, once again, John Wilcox attempting to reveal a lot more about Romans than what meets the eye.